I never truly wanted to destroy the family, but the fact is, my parents were going to take my grandfather's entire estate after this weekend's gathering. I had already told my grandfather everything, and he was genuinely shocked to learn that the legacy he had built over more than 40 years, including $2.5 million in savings and 3 rental properties, was on the verge of being stolen by his own children through the most legal and cunning means possible. He fell silent before his eyes lit up. And then he told me his entire plan, one that would defeat them at their own game. My name is Mila, 22 years old, currently in my final year studying finance at a public university in Massachusetts. In recent years, I've been living in a small apartment near my grandfather's house, Austin Mendoza, a 76-year-old man who remains astonishingly sharp, lucid, and fiercely independent. He used to run a construction company for 40 years before retiring, and, to this day, he's the person I trust most in the world. Not just because he's family, but because he's always treated me like an adult, listened to me with kindness, and encouraged me to think for myself, something my parents never did. My family isn't poor, but we've always been weighed down by a tiresome obsession with money. My father, Joseph, is a mid-level insurance employee. My mother, Harper, used to be an accounting assistant and now stays home as a housewife. They're constantly talking about early retirement, smart investments, and often implying that Austin is old and should start sharing the burden. Lately, those implications have become clearer, more frequent. My mother asks if Grandpa forgets his medication. My father brings up moving him into a nursing home for comprehensive care. I've started feeling uneasy, not just from what they say, but from the unnaturalness in their tone, in their eyes. Part of me tries to reason that they're just concerned about his health, but another part, deeper inside, remains wary. Grandpa Austin isn't senile, not ill. He still does personal accounting for 3 rental properties and takes a morning walk like meditation. And then, on an ordinary evening at my parents' house, while I was wearing headphones doing the dishes, I accidentally overheard a conversation that changed everything. But before I tell you what it was, let me ask you, where are you watching this story from? Don't forget to leave a comment and hit like, because this story will make you rethink the meaning of the word family. That evening, after dinner at my parents' house around 9:30, I stood at the sink washing dishes, still hearing the low murmur of the TV from the living room and the clinking of glasses and plates at the table. When I turned off the faucet, my mother's voice came through the cracked door. "He has too much money to be living alone like this, Joseph. We need to settle this before something happens." I froze. My father lowered his voice. "I'm not sure. If Dad finds out, he'll be furious." My mother replied instantly, firmly, as if rehearsed. "No, everything will be legal. I already asked the bank about general power of attorney and the process for declaring mental incompetence. All we need is the family doctor's signature, then notarize it. After that, accounts, properties, payments, we'll control them all to take care of him." My heart pounded. I put down the dish towel, opened the voice memos app, placed my phone face down behind a pot, screen dark, then stepped quietly into the hallway. Through the gap, I saw my mother sitting upright, hands clasped, eyes locked on my father like giving a command. "I talked to someone at the bank last week. They said if we have the power of attorney and a competency evaluation, that's it. I'll arrange for him to sign the papers at this weekend's dinner. Just say it's to ease the burden of paying bills." My father held a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. "I don't want to go too far. Dad's still sharp. Austin's not someone easily fooled." My mother smirked, voice as steady and cold as a needle. "Which is why we have to do it now. Before he changes his mind. Before Mila interferes." Hearing my name sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to step in and confront them, but my feet were glued to the floor. I let the recording run. 6 minutes and 18 seconds. Long enough to capture the full scheme. moving him into a comfortable nursing home, collecting the safe deposit keys, transferring bank access to family management, and adjusting rental property arrangements so the money flows into one place. I gripped the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. My grandfather, the man who taught me to balance budgets with a pencil, who still walks 30 minutes every morning, who remembers every payment due date of every lease, was being legally stripped of his autonomy by his own son and daughter-in-law. I stopped the recording, checked the file. Clear quality. Every word audible. I tucked the phone into my pocket, feeling like someone had just pulled the chair out from under me. On the way home, the clock read 10:12, and the night breeze carried the scent of damp leaves through the car window. I called Grandpa, but hung up. I needed to look him in the eye when I told him. My decision was firm. Tomorrow morning, I'd go to his house, play the recording, lay out every detail, and we'd make a plan. I would not let anyone slap a mentally incompetent label on the sharpest man I know just because of their greed. The next morning, I arrived at Grandpa's earlier than usual, bringing 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for him, his favorite Americano. He opened the door with his usual slow but steady gait, wearing the gray crewneck sweater Grandma Ellen had knitted. When I sat down on the sofa, he already sensed something. "You never could hide anything from your face, Mila," he said, placing his cup on the old wooden table by the window. I didn't beat around the bush. I took out my phone, opened the recording, and hit play. He didn't say a word during the 6 minutes and 18 seconds, just sat there, hands clasped, eyes on the wooden floor. When it ended, he looked up, voice lower than usual. "I knew. Joseph's always been weak, but I didn't think it would come to this." I could feel the heavy sorrow from a man who once led a company with over 200 employees. I asked, "What do we do now?" He was silent for a moment, then stood and walked toward the room at the end of the hall, his private office. I followed. On the desk was an old safe with a combination lock. He turned it 3 times, entered the code, then opened it. Inside was a carefully clipped folder, bank books, property contracts, and itemized expense reports from the last 10 years. He pulled out one folder, turned to the support section. Over $100,000 given to Joseph and Harper over 5 years, including my college tuition, car repairs for my mother, overdue credit card payments, and a $35,000 investment help that I later found out was used just to pay off debt. He spoke with a calm but profound voice. "I used to think if I helped them, they'd change. But maybe kindness doesn't always get repaid with decency." I sat beside him, opened my laptop, and we reviewed all property contracts. The 3 real estate assets were still under his name, unencumbered. Savings account was strong, all paperwork, legal and complete. I exhaled in relief, but at the same time, a thought struck me. If not for last night's recording, would we have ever known what was happening behind the scenes? He told me more about Grandma Ellen, his late wife, and her last words before she passed. "Always protect Mila. She's the only one like you, stubborn, but fair." I nearly cried, hearing that. He held my hand and said slowly, "Now, we don't react with anger. We prepare. You'll help me, won't you?" I nodded. "I'll watch them. Every move. What about you?" He looked out the window, where the morning light touched Ellen's rose garden. "I'll call a few old friends and prepare something they won't see coming." From that moment, an alliance was formed, not between 2 generations, but between 2 people who knew that peace is never freely given. It must be protected, with intellect, with evidence, and above all, with an unyielding will. And I knew what came next wouldn't be easy, but we would not let lies dressed as family steal the truth. In the days that followed, I returned to my role as the obedient daughter my parents expected. Still came home for dinner, still asked casual questions, and silently noted every detail. My mother started bringing up the nursing home more often. She talked about a place called Sunset Maple, clean with 24/7 doctors on site and even a chess room for seniors. I pretended to be interested, asked, "How did you hear about that place?" She answered without hesitation, "Oh, a friend from church recommended it. Don't you think Grandpa gets lonely being on his own?" I nodded, hiding the chill in my chest. Meanwhile, my father increasingly called Austin, citing vague reasons like streamlining asset management or reviewing old insurance contracts. I knew they were accelerating, and so was I. My grandfather wasn't sitting still either. He reached out to Elijah Miller, a longtime friend, now vice president at First National Bank, where he kept most of his assets. Elijah, a discreet man, immediately confirmed, "Yes, Joseph and Harper came here last week. They asked about financial power of attorney, guardianship, and specifically how to declare mental incompetence. I had my suspicions, but without evidence, I couldn't intervene." Austin sighed, thanked him. I knew he was disappointed, but he stayed composed. He called Penelope Davis, an independent notary who used to work for his company. He invited her over for the next week under the pretext of reviewing legal documents. But in truth, to witness and verify a confrontation, he and I compiled a list of assets, income sources, and documentation proving he was fully competent. Emails managing properties, tax deadlines, monthly records with his accountant. I used my financial studies to build a timeline, documenting support given to my parents, transfers, proof of their spending. The more I worked, the clearer it became. If we didn't act, Grandpa's wealth wouldn't just be taken, it would be erased along with his dignity, through notarized lies. Austin told me, "I'm not afraid of losing money. But I won't let them do it by trampling trust." We finalized the plan. Invite Joseph and Harper to his house under the pretense of signing power of attorney, a legal trap, timed and fully witnessed. And most importantly, with me there. No longer just the little granddaughter listening to his stories, but a partner, a witness to every word, a protector of the truth, with evidence, with voice, and with a loyalty no number could buy. That weekend, my parents hosted a small party at their home, under the pretense of celebrating my completion of college. On the surface, everything was meticulously arranged, the dining table beautifully set, red wine poured into tall crystal glasses, hors d'oeuvres of imported cheeses and toasted crackers arranged in the shape of a sunflower. But for me and Grandpa Austin, that party was the stage for a carefully scripted performance. We arrived on time. Not too early to avoid being cornered separately, not too late to miss their planned setup. As soon as we walked through the door, I saw my mother, Harper, approach with a smile wider than usual, her hands clasping Grandpa's as if that recording had never existed. "We're so lucky to still have Austin so healthy," she said, glancing toward my father. Grandpa replied curtly, "Healthy, and still remembering." That line cast a slight shadow over the room. During dinner, my mother repeatedly brought up how older folks should rest, how finances should be managed by someone else, and how Mila is about to have her own life, she can't care for you forever. My father tried to maintain a friendly demeanor, constantly pouring Grandpa's wine and telling childhood stories I knew had never been mentioned before, as if playing the role of the dutiful son. I sat there, observing every exchanged glance. At one point, my mother went into the kitchen to fetch more dessert, and I followed. When no one else was around, she lowered her voice and said, "Mila, you should convince him to sign a few papers. It's just payment authorization, so I can take better care of him." Simple. I tilted my head and asked, "What papers?" She hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Some banking documents. Your father already prepared them. Austin is getting old, can't you see?" I didn't answer. I simply smiled and walked away. When I returned to the table, Grandpa had already stood up and placed his napkin on the chair. "I have a bit of a headache. I'll head out early," he said. No one tried to stop him. But in my parents' eyes, a clear flash of disappointment appeared, as if a carefully rehearsed act had been cut short before the climax. I quickly excused myself and left with him. Before walking out the door, I hugged my mother and whispered, "I'll think about what you said." She smiled, but her eyes were cold as stone. On the drive back to his house, Grandpa was silent for a long while. At the third intersection, he finally spoke gently. "They've started staking their claims." I nodded. "I know, but I've also started digging the foundation." That night, we double-checked the schedules with Elijah and Penelope. Everything was ready. Confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when. And when it came, there would be no room for excuses or pretending. The next morning, Grandpa Austin woke earlier than usual. I had arrived by 8, carrying the set of documents we had prepared all week, a timeline of financial transfers, email correspondences about money, photocopies of property ownership certificates, and a statement of mental competence drafted under a lawyer's guidance, not to submit to court, but for Penelope Davis, the independent notary, to indirectly verify his legal capacity in case of future disputes. Around 9:30, Elijah Miller arrived first, dressed in a simple gray suit, bringing bank documents and a record of recent client meetings. Penelope followed shortly after, holding a black leather briefcase and a small notebook for notes. They were both invited to sit in the living room, where soft sunlight filtered through thin white curtains, gentle but intentional. Grandpa brewed tea himself, setting each cup down carefully, and, exactly at 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was Joseph and Harper. My parents entered as if unaware of what was coming. My mother carried a leather folder. My father, overly cheerful, said loudly, "We're here as invited, right? Just need to sign some payment authorization papers?" Grandpa didn't respond right away. He invited them to sit, then turned to Penelope. "I invited you here to witness and record this entire exchange according to proper notarization procedures." Penelope nodded and opened her notebook. Elijah sat quietly. I was across from them, hands resting on the file folder. Grandpa began in a slow but firm voice. "Before signing anything, I have a few questions. Did you or did you not go to First National Bank to inquire about full power of attorney, procedures for declaring incompetence, and steps to transfer control of my assets?" The air froze for 3 seconds. My mother shifted in her seat. My father stammered, "It was just an inquiry, in case of emergency." Grandpa looked at Elijah. Elijah confirmed with a nod. "I was the one who met with them. The questions weren't about emergency care. They were about legal asset control." Penelope looked up and took notes. I placed my phone on the table, turned on the speaker. 6 minutes and 18 seconds. My mother's voice rang out clear as day. "If we have notarized papers and a medical evaluation, then accounts, properties, all come under one roof." My father turned pale. My mother tried to stay composed. "That's edited. It's not illegal." Penelope interrupted. "I'm a notary. I have the right to refuse notarization if there are signs of deceit or coercion." At that moment, Grandpa pulled a file from the drawer and placed it on the table. "This is the revised will. I've transferred all liquid assets, including $2.5 million in cash, into an education and investment trust dedicated solely to Mila. The fund is overseen by an independent lawyer, to be disbursed only when she turns 25. The properties remain in my name, but all future rights are clearly documented in this file." He looked up, stared directly at my parents. "From now on, I will not transfer another cent. If you truly want to change, show it through actions over the next year. If not, then quietly leave this family." Harper's face turned ashen. My father lowered his head, voice choking. "Dad, we just wanted to help." Grandpa replied, "No one helps me by trying to paint me as incompetent to take what I've spent a lifetime building." Penelope closed her notebook. Elijah stood, gave me a silent nod. I felt a slight weight lift from my chest. the battle wasn't over, but in this first confrontation, we had preserved the truth. And more than any inheritance, we had preserved honor. After that morning, no one in my family was the same. My parents left Grandpa Austin's house in silence. No slammed doors, no farewells, only the awkward shuffle of two people stepping off the porch, carrying their humiliation with them. I stood at the second-floor window, watching them. My mother clutched the unopened folder, and my father kept opening and closing the car door as if unsure what to say. They were used to manipulating others through guilt. But this time, there was no one left to blame. Confronted with the truth, through sound, through witnesses, through words from their own mouths, the carefully constructed narrative of concern for the elderly collapsed. Less than an hour later, my phone started ringing. First my mother, then my father, then my mother again. I didn't answer. Then came the voice messages. My mother's voice furious. "You're a traitor. This family raised you, fed you, paid for your education, and now you side with a stubborn old man against your own parents?" Then my father. "If you don't convince him to change the inheritance, don't ever think of yourself as part of this family again." I sat still, not crying. I opened the family group chat, the one where birthday pictures, Christmas wishes, and cat stories used to be shared, and for the first time in my life, I replied without hesitation. I wrote, "I'm not a traitor. I'm standing with the truth. If that means I'm no longer part of this so-called family, then that's a price I'm willing to pay." That afternoon, I sat with Grandpa on the back porch. Late summer, sunlight, spilled over the lavender bushes Grandma Ellen once planted. He handed me a cup of warm black tea. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. But deep down, there was a sorrow I couldn't quite name. It wasn't the pain of betrayal, but of mourning. I mourned the belief that if I did well, lived kindly, my parents would value that. I once thought goodness and loyalty were automatic values in a family, but when everything was put on the financial scale, I realized some people are willing to crush trust just for control. Grandpa handed me a photocopy of the education trust document he'd created, $2.5 million sealed, managed by an independent attorney, to be disbursed only when I turned 25, with a clear academic or long-term investment plan. But what moved me most was the handwritten note at the bottom. He wrote, "To Mila, the one with Ellen's eyes, and the heart I trust most." I was stunned, not because of the money, but because of the recognition. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just an heir. I was chosen to continue something that meant more than wealth. That night, my father didn't call again. My mother's messages stopped. I knew they were angry, or ashamed, or both, but I no longer hoped for anything from them. Grandpa said, not angry, just tired. "I used to think growing old meant being cared for. Now I understand. It means seeing clearly who really stays." I looked at him and, for the first time, didn't see an old man. I saw a warrior who had lived fully. And I knew, at that moment, I was no longer Mila the granddaughter. I was the one bearing the weight, not just for my future, but for the integrity nearly snuffed out by those who shared my name. 2 days after the confrontation, Grandpa Austin's house grew quieter than ever. No more ringing phones, no more scolding texts, no more threats disguised as familial concern. But in that silence, I began hearing my own voice more clearly. I spent Sunday afternoon sitting in Grandpa's office, organizing files, sorting financial documents, and writing in a journal for the first time in years. I didn't write about anger. I wrote about release. Like I had been carrying an unnamed weight for so long, just to preserve a fragile illusion of family peace, not realizing it was slowly corroding the fairness inside me. Grandpa returned from his walk around 5 p.m., holding a bundle of white roses and some dried lavender, Grandma Ellen's favorites. He said nothing, just placed the bouquet on the small table by the window, lit a candle, and turned to me. "She'd be proud of you." I didn't respond, just smiled faintly. But inside me was a rising wave, not of rage, but of awakening. For years I had tried to be useful, likable, agreeable, to be loved, and I realized sometimes you have to accept being disliked, just to do what's right. That night, Grandpa told me, "If you want, start planning for grad school. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Family shouldn't be the thing holding you back." I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, a gentle thought entered my mind. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. Even without my parents' support, I knew I wasn't alone. I had knowledge, I had courage, and I had a grandfather who wasn't just a shelter, but a mirror reminding me, whenever I felt weak, integrity may be lonely, but it's never the wrong path. The next day, I emailed my academic advisor, inquiring about MBA scholarship eligibility. And when I hit send, I knew I had stepped out of the old circle of silence and deference. I was no longer trying to be the good daughter in my parents' eyes. I was becoming myself, clearly, wholly, and without needing anyone's permission. I began the habit of waking early every morning with my grandfather, walking around the small neighborhood he had lived in for nearly 30 years. The red brick path leading to Maple Grove Park was always lightly veiled in mist at 6 a.m., with trees still glistening with dew. Grandpa Austin often carried a wooden cane he didn't actually need, saying it was so the squirrels know who's boss. I laughed every time he said that. But this time, I didn't just laugh. I felt grateful to still have mornings like these. No more tense phone calls. No more playing the role of the obedient daughter at dinner tables laced with ulterior motives. No more choosing between loyalty and what's right. Now, I had space to breathe, to think, and to live by my own values. After the walk, I sat with him in his office, a space filled with Ellen's bookshelf, old investment folders from the 1990s, and a worn map marked with plots he once built. We didn't just talk about money or property. We talked about continuity, about how real family isn't built on blood, but on actions. "You'll meet all kinds of people in your life," he said. "Some will praise you, others will use you, but only those who truly love you will hold you back when you're about to go wrong." I nodded, and deep inside, I knew I would not repeat my parents' path. I wouldn't use money to control people. I wouldn't build a life by stripping someone else's power away. I would begin with integrity, even if it meant walking alone. That afternoon, I submitted my MBA applications to 3 universities, including one I had once thought I wasn't good enough for. But this time, I didn't let fear define my decisions. That evening, Grandpa and I had a simple but warm dinner of vegetable soup and garlic bread. Before bed, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "From now on, this is your home, Mila. Not because I share it, but because you deserve to live in peace without having to beg for it." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, so gently it could have been a breath. But inside me, something had begun to sprout, a feeling of being seen, not for my role, not for expectations, but for who I truly was. And I knew the journey ahead would still be hard, but this time, I wasn't walking alone. I carried a part of him, of Ellen, and of myself. The girl who dared to say no to protect what was right, even if it meant stepping away from a family. I received an email from my mother on Tuesday afternoon. The subject line had just 3 words: "Come talk." The message was brief, with no apology, no accountability. Just, "We want to see you. It's still a family matter, shouldn't drag on." I read it over and over, then closed my laptop, replying to nothing. But that evening, while tidying Grandpa's desk drawers, I found an old photo, me at 6 years old, sitting on Grandpa Austin's shoulders in Ellen's rose garden. My face was radiant, and he was looking up at me as if I were the only light in the sky. And I understood. I was no longer the girl in that photo. I was someone with the right to choose whose story I appeared in, and under what conditions. 3 days later, I agreed to meet my parents at a small cafe near downtown. I arrived on time, wearing a light blue shirt and gray jeans. No makeup, nothing flashy, but also no longer timid. They were already there, sitting side by side, still wearing the look of a decent family. My mother spoke first. "We went too far. I know you've been influenced by Grandpa, but you must understand that money is meant to secure the whole family. It can't all go to you." I didn't respond. My father added, "Whatever you do, you're still our daughter, but if you can't change direction, then you're cutting yourself off from your own blood." I sipped water, then set the glass down, looking straight at them. "No, I'm not influenced by anyone. I made a choice, and I chose to stand with the one who didn't try to steal through lies. If that means I'm no longer your blood, then I accept that." The air went cold. My mother folded her arms, eyes hard. "You really think you know everything? Just believe whatever an old man says?" I paused, then pulled from my bag a copy of the education trust document Grandpa had signed, placing it on the table. "He didn't just talk. He acted. He proved it on paper. And neither of you have apologized. You just want to control things like before." My father looked like he wanted to reply, but I stood up first. "I didn't come here to ask forgiveness or to listen to blame. I came to say this. From now on, I won't respond to threats or read any more toxic words in the family chat. If you want to see me again, come with kindness. If not, I'll be fine. Very fine. Without you." I left the cafe before they could say anything else. The early autumn wind swept through my hair, light as air. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty walking away. I only felt light. As if the final door connecting me to the obedient daughter had quietly closed, opening instead a long, quiet hallway where I could walk forward without anyone pulling on the string behind me. A week after that last meeting with my parents, Grandpa and I sat in his office, facing the new whiteboard he had bought. On it were 3 phrases written in blue marker: meaningful, long-term, valuable to the community. These were the 3 criteria he wanted to set for the first investment I'd manage from the $2.5 million education fund, established in my name, but accessible only in phases and with guidance from an independent lawyer and him. "Don't think about profit just yet," he said. "Think about what would make you proud to tell this story 20 years from now." I looked at the board, then at him, the man who had been nearly erased by his own son, yet sat here, calmly, redrawing the future with patient strokes. And for the first time, responsibility didn't feel frightening. It felt sacred. I opened my laptop and presented an idea I had been mulling over for weeks: an online financial education platform for young women, especially those without someone like Grandpa to guide them. The content would be developed by me and other finance students: free courses, discussion forums, and monthly expense trackers. "Not everyone has someone like you," I said. "And if I can do anything to help others avoid the damage that comes from financial ignorance, then maybe that's the right thing to do." He was quiet for a few seconds, then nodded slowly, decisively. "That's the best investment pitch I've ever heard." 3 days later, we met with the fund's attorney, Sylvia Clark, to present the plan. Sylvia was sharp, practical, but when she heard the idea, she smiled. "It's not the biggest project I've approved, but it might be one of the most sincere." Grandpa chuckled, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes what you need to plant isn't money, it's trust." That sentence stayed with me all the way home. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. In a world where money is often used to buy influence, he taught me to use it to inspire value. And I knew, whether this fund succeeded or failed, its first seed, the trust between me and Grandpa, had already begun to grow. That evening, we had dinner outside under the bougainvillea vines he had just trimmed. I told him the first questions I wanted to ask our research group for the platform. He told me about the first time he secured funding to build a project at age 27. His voice was low, but there was a particular light in his eyes, the light of renewal. Not of youth, but of continuity. And in that moment, I understood. Blood may betray, but trust, once built on listening and recognition, doesn't need blood to survive. I got a call from an unknown number on Wednesday afternoon while I was in the university library revising the investment plan for the financial education platform. A woman's voice spoke quickly, nearly drowned by traffic. "Hello, Ms. Mila. I'm the night nurse at St. Augustine Hospital. Your mother, Mrs. Harper Mendoza, was just brought in for a minor accident. She fell down the stairs. Nothing serious, but hit her head. We need a family member to sign for overnight observation." I paused for a few seconds, not because I was confused, but because my body recoiled with an old reflex. Harper Mendoza. That name had been the root of so much anxiety in me for so long. The person who once called me a traitor, who told me I was no longer part of the family. And now I was being asked to show up like none of that had ever happened. I arrived at the hospital an hour later, not in a rush, not angry, just going, like a stranger fulfilling a final moral obligation. My mother lay on the bed, bandaged around her forehead, eyes closed, her face tired and noticeably older after just a few weeks apart. When I entered, she opened her eyes and looked at me, with neither anger nor remorse, only surprise. "You still came?" I pulled up a chair, kept my voice calm. "I came because the nurse called, not because of anything you said or didn't say." She closed her eyes. After a while, she said, "They say I can go home tomorrow. Just observation. Nothing serious." I nodded. "I've signed the paperwork." Silence stretched for several minutes. No one tried to fill it. Then she said, almost whispering, "Do you really think I wanted to hurt your grandfather?" I didn't answer, because that no longer mattered. What mattered was that she had never apologized, and I no longer needed her apology to move on. I stood up, picked up my bag. "I hope you recover soon. If you need medical help, contact your doctor. As for everything else, I think we've been clear enough." My mother didn't call out. She just lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if trying to grasp something already out of reach. That night, I told Grandpa everything. He wasn't surprised, didn't offer advice. He just said, "You went and you left at the right time." I understood. Helping doesn't mean returning. Compassion doesn't erase boundaries. And forgiveness, sometimes, requires no apology, just a decision not to let yourself be harmed again. I opened my laptop and added one sentence to the project plan. Personal finance isn't just about managing money, it's about knowing when to give and when to hold back, even with family. That afternoon, Grandpa and I sat on the old wooden bench beneath the climbing roses Ellen had cared for nearly 2 decades. The peach-colored blooms opened wide, tilting toward the soft light of late summer, beautiful enough that no words were needed. He handed me a cup of chamomile tea, the kind Ellen used to brew when I visited on weekends. We didn't say much. We just looked at the garden, a place that had once sheltered memories and now bore witness to a new beginning. I told him about the positive response email from a prestigious MBA program. They invited me to submit a full application and personal essay. He simply smiled. No applause, no cheers. But in his eyes was a warmth and trust that told me he had seen this outcome long before I ever dared to believe in it. "You know," he said, "when Ellen passed, I didn't want to invest in anything anymore. I still had wealth, but it felt mute, empty, until you sat beside me, not asking for anything, just asking, 'What do you need to feel at peace?' That's when I knew. There was still something worth planting." I squeezed his hand gently. "And I'm grateful you let me stay." He told me about the first day he built a house, with his own 2 hands. I told him about the first lesson I want to include on the platform. Freedom isn't about needing no one. It's about no one being able to force you to live against your values. The sun began to lower, its golden light spreading over each leaf like a veil of honey. The small house behind us was quiet, not because it lacked people, but because those left knew how to keep silent when it mattered. I looked at him one last time before going inside, then turned back to the garden. Ellen's roses were still blooming, not for admiration, not for praise. They bloomed because that was their nature. And maybe I, too, was learning to live that way. Not to please, not to prove, but simply to be whole, kind, and at peace. And if someone asked me, what held me steady when everything tried to push me out of what was once called family, I'd answer, a grandfather, a garden, and a truth, that sometimes family isn't born. It's chosen, and built from what no one can take away. Trust. You've just heard my story, not one about wills or inheritance, but about something deeper, the right to choose the truth, even when it means stepping away from a place once called family. Maybe you'll never be called a traitor just for protecting someone you love, but I believe one day you'll face a line. The line between silence and speaking out. Between keeping peace and keeping justice. And in that moment, you'll understand. It's how you stand that defines who you are. I don't tell this story to be pitied. I tell it because I know, somewhere out there, there are people like me, people who were told they were too sensitive, too stubborn, just because they refused to accept being mistreated by those closest to them. If you're in that place, remember, you are not alone. And you have the right to choose a different family, not by blood, but by love, kindness, and trust that doesn't demand a price. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment. Even just a, I know that feeling. And don't forget to like and subscribe because here I'll be sharing more stories about those who chose themselves when no one else did. And sometimes, those are the people who end up living lives more beautiful than any will could ever leave behind.